Very warm welcome to you wherever you're joining us from for a very important discussion and webinar titled Telehealth versus In-Person Visits, How to Improve Your Care. My name is Shilpa Venkatachalam, and I'm honored to be your facilitator for this evening's discussion. I'm the Associate Director of Patient-Centered Research at the Global Healthy Living Foundation, and also the co-principal investigator on Arthritis Power, which is our research registry and tracking app for people living with different types of rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. Our mission at the Global Healthy Living Foundation is to improve the lives of people with chronic disease through better access to care, education, support, advocacy, and patient-centered research. And so in line with that, we've been conducting webinars like this one for over 2 years now, bringing cutting-edge research and facilitating dialogue on important topics in healthcare between researchers, clinicians, advocates, and people living with chronic conditions. I know we're very eager to dive right in to the topic today, so I'll take a few more brief moments to quickly frame our discussion and go through some housekeeping rules and introduce you to our distinguished speaker. In an effort to provide greater accessibility, this webinar will provide closed captions. You can click on the closed caption button on the bottom of the webinar screen to turn them on or off. So for today's webinar and an introduction to our speaker, managing a chronic rheumatic disease is challenging for a number of reasons, and it is crucial that management and care remain constant. On March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak of COVID-19 a pandemic. This required adjustments to how care was delivered by doctors to their patients, and this continues on as we know today. Many of us were lucky enough to continue care during the pandemic through appointments conducted via technology using phone and video. But challenges persist. Questions such as, how do we know if we should go in physically versus use technology for an appointment? How, in fact, do we prepare for a telehealth appointment? And is it okay to use a combination of both in-person and telehealth appointments? To answer some of these questions, I am delighted to introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Grace Wright, who is consultant rheumatologist in New York City. Dr. Wright, who you can see on your screen, received her undergraduate degree at Barnard College, Columbia University. She earned her medical and doctorate degrees at NYU School of Medicine in 1990 and completed an internship and residency in internal medicine and a fellowship in rheumatology at the NYU Medical Center, where she served as clinical associate professor of medicine. Dr. Wright is also the recipient of the Helen R. Downs Award for Academic Distinction, and we are really privileged to have her join us today. So thank you, Dr. Wright, for your time. Lastly, very quickly, I promise, let me go through a few housekeeping rules before I can hand over to Dr. Wright. So please note that all our audience members will be placed on mute. We do this mainly to help us ensure a good quality recording for the webinar, so people who do not have a chance to attend this webinar live can access it later on. This webinar will be posted on the Creaky Joints website, like many of our other webinars. This webinar, again, is for all of us. We encourage your questions throughout. You can use the chat screen that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen to send us questions at any time during the webinar. Your questions help inform future content that we develop at Creaky Joints, so we thank you for them in advance. I will say also that we have received a high volume of questions, and of course, we want to try to answer all of them to the best of our ability. However, it is likely that we may not be able to get to every single question today, and for that, we do apologize to you in advance. Finally, Dr. Wright will present for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will move on to the Q&A session. So once again, please do send us your questions. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you, Dr. Wright, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I believe I was muted there for a moment. It's such a critical thing for us to understand the value of technology and the place of technology in helping us to continue to receive care. And this, for me as a rheumatologist, is really important because we partner with patients over long journeys, sometimes lifelong journeys. And so it's really important to understand this. So our agenda today is really going to be split across three things, and really to first sort of define what is telehealth, and how do we understand the difference between telehealth and in-person doctor visits, and how do you know which one is right? And then how do you know which one is right for you? So the idea here is to have this be a tool that helps us to optimize our care. I want to deliver the best care, and you want to receive the best care, and we want to use technology to help bridge that gap. So we'll start off first by defining what this is. And so, when you have a chronic rheumatic disease, one of the issues we see is that the disease is never silent, right? It has periods where it flares, periods in which it feels quiet. But even in those quiet moments, there can be ongoing inflammation that can lead to damage. And one of the things that we really need to always keep an eye on is not just how you feel, but how your disease is performing. And so it's these silent periods that put patients at risk. And often when it's difficult to get to the doctor, whether it's because of a thunderstorm or it's just difficult, you're in a flare, we tend to pull back. And we, meaning even I as a provider, we tend to, we'll skip that appointment, we'll put it off because it's uncomfortable. But that's when we're at risk for damage if we have persistent inflammation that goes unchecked, that nobody gets a line of sight on. And this becomes even more critical when we're thinking about things that as a person we can't see. You can't see your heart. I can't see your lungs unless I have some other visual tool. And there are various things that we do to check internal organs. And when this is a chronic rheumatic disease that may have complications that affect our insides, it's important to have that kind of persistent inflammation monitored or in many cases uncovered. So when we think about the pandemic, as was just referenced, it really put a cringe into our well-oiled machinery where patients were afraid to come to the office, and rightfully so. Physicians were unable to come to the office. Sometimes there was no staff. We didn't have the correct protective gear, but we've really evolved and we've learned. And so when the office that you attend is following the proper safety protocols, the risk of exposure to COVID-19 is actually quite low and really allows you to benefit from seeing your healthcare provider without the worry of contracting SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. And we'll talk about, for different people in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, that journey to the office can be different. And so in terms of the hurdles that you have to overcome to get to the doctor's office, there are different things that we consider as we go along, but having something like bring me into your room, into your home, and that's actually been very helpful for many of the things that we treat. So how is this different from an in-person doctor visit? Well, number one, when you go to the doctor's office, there's usually a team of providers. For some patients are going to a hospital site, or they're going to some sort of medical center, or they're going to a small office, but there will be staff that may interface with you differently. They're nurses, medical assistants, and so there's a team of people that you see, and they each get information from you in different ways, and they also give information differently. So we'll talk a bit about how in telehealth that may be different. So telehealth or telemedicine, we use those terms interchangeably. And I really just want to say it's the potato kind of mix, but there's a subtle difference because telemedicine really refers to what we're doing in the midst of delivering healthcare. Where you're going to a doctor's office, you're getting some sort of medical care done. Telehealth really is much more encompassing and will include nutritionists, psychiatrists, physical therapy. There is sort of this full spectrum of services. But it's important for us to understand which one to use, when to use it, and what the pros and cons are, because not everything can be managed with telehealth alone. Now, when we talk about the tele part of it, it means that you're seeing that provider, whoever that is, using some sort of technology service that usually contains video and or audio services. And so some of the common ones that we know would be FaceTime, Skype, or various apps that are used. We now have Zoom Healthcare, a variety of platforms that have arisen to make it easier for you to access the video technology or the audio technology. Now, granted, this all requires that you have an internet service, and that's not always been as simple or as easy or as accessible for everyone. So telehealth also includes the ability to do that visit over the phone. Now, obviously, I can't see you on the phone, but we can certainly have conversations, and there's some things that can be managed quite well with just the conversation. Others would be benefited by having me see you in person. So telemedicine, has been on the minds for a very long time. The difference is that now with the pandemic and the ability to sort of, unlock various assets, such that with the pandemic, we removed many of the hurdles that segmented telemedicine in various parts of the country. There are other countries outside of the United States in which telemedicine was already incorporated into usual care. That was not the case in the US. And so you had to live in certain areas and you had to be in a certain location. Your doctor had to be in a certain location in order for you to correctly use telemedicine. All of those barriers were removed with the pandemic. And so this is one of the good things that has come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that we have removed obstacles that now allow us to deliver care. And so now you can see your physician literally using a telehealth method. So ways that you can do this: you can video chat, much as I'm doing right now, except you'd be talking back to me. You can talk to me about your symptoms. You can show me your medications. Often patients don't want to or can't bring all of their medications to the office, but it's a simple thing to hold it up and show me in the camera so that I can see that and really see exactly what it is you're taking. Sometimes the words may be difficult to pronounce if they're prescribed by somebody else. A picture's worth 1,000 words. You can hold that up and show me. The other thing that you can do is you can send me a picture. There are many of these apps that allow you to either show the body part that is afflicted, whether it's a swollen joint, a rash on the face. It's a little harder, for instance, to show an ulcer inside the mouth, although there have been some creative ways, if you're using a phone, not a computer, to really angle the camera as if you're doing a selfie, but of your mouth, to show an oral ulcer, because it matters, right? When we see an ulcer, depending on the nature of the ulcer, it might help us in making the diagnosis. But the other option is to take a picture and then send that to your healthcare provider electronically so that we have that picture in hand. And I actually like to do that because I can then attach it to the note, the progress note for that visit, and it gives me a visual reminder of exactly what you were talking about in real time, because you had it at the time of the visit. You're not just describing it, or you took a picture when it was actually happening. The other thing that we can do is really sort of as a check-in. Many of our patients with rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, who have stiffness, there's issues with functionality, being able to do various things at home, being able to function at work, depression, mood disorders. There's a variety of things that we can talk about, and we can actually track those in a very organized manner over a telehealth visit. So when there's chronic health in play, even if you're talking about, for instance, diabetes, you can keep a log of your sugars. High blood pressure, you can keep a log of your blood pressure if you have a blood pressure cuff at home, and those are now available at the local pharmacy or sometimes online, quite easy to have that shipped, so that we can have those numbers and we can make decisions about changing medications, changing diet, changing exercise programs based on keeping of the logs and then the sharing of those logs. The other thing that we'll talk about is, for instance, therapy sessions, which can be psychotherapy. So you can meet with a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a licensed social worker to talk about things that are bothering. We've seen a lot of anxiety and depression sort of surfacing. It's really been a very difficult time for everyone. And so it's really a wonderful thing to be able to extend the psychological care to the telemedicine platform. Prescription refills, often we need to have a discussion about exactly what we're doing or make modifications to doses. And so refills can be done over telemedicine. And certainly a referral to another specialist can also be done as we do this. I know that I've had the opportunity to help patients find other specialists because of a problem that was uncovered during a telehealth visit. And when appropriate, you can also get a second opinion on a problem, as long as that particular problem is something that can be assessed across the virtual screen, as we say. So there are many different ways in which telehealth can be employed It doesn't just have to be what we used to do when we went into the office 100% of the time. So think of telemedicine as an addition. But it's important to remember that there are things that we can do in telemedicine, and there are things that we can do live in person in the office. And so it's important to understand how to balance that and when to use which method. So there are things that I cannot do in person. I cannot, except with really sort of fancy technology, listen to the lungs. Now, cardiology has all of these nice little gadgets that you can purchase, put on the lungs, put on the heart. They can actually capture your EKG, listen to your breath sounds, but these are more expensive and not necessarily accessible to everybody. But those are the kinds of things, if I think I'm having an abnormal issue with my heart, if my lungs are congested, difficulty breathing, those sorts of things, I need to be seen. There are things that I need to touch that you can't touch. There are things that I need to do, for instance, examining, just think of a shoulder. There are things that you can do when you move your joint yourself. There's additional information that's gained when I move that joint that can help me assess whether or not there's a tear in a tendon or if this is a muscle sprain. So we'll start to kind of weed through what is the level of urgency and what are the kinds of locations that require in-person versus telehealth. But just remember, if I need to touch you, if your doctor needs to touch you, if your healthcare provider needs to do something to you, that obviously can't be done in telehealth. So things like, for instance, getting blood work have to go somewhere. Sometimes you can send a lab in to draw the blood, but most often we have to have you come in to get blood work. If there's an imaging study, whether it's an X-ray, an ultrasound, an MRI that has to be done, that clearly has to be done at a site, whether it's in the doctor's office or a freestanding site. And then if I have to examine certain things, detect, for instance, if something that is newly painful is actually swollen when you think of a joint, then I need you to come in to do that. So while the telehealth appointment is important and very helpful, it does not replace in totality the benefits of an in-person visit, especially when you have something like rheumatoid arthritis amongst the grouping of rheumatic conditions that we take care of. And then to remember that it's what I call the accidental or incidental learning. There are things that I discover that my patients are not complaining about because it doesn't hurt. It's not something that they would have noticed. And in complex cases where you have chronic inflammatory diseases, chronic autoimmune diseases, it's important to get that incidental learning for the physician so that things that don't hurt, that don't sort of jump to top of mind, we can uncover and then address care appropriately. So again, both are very important. Routine care and follow-up where things are steady and stable, and most likely we're continuing the pattern that we're doing, yes, that's ideal for telehealth. If it's a minor flare, and a minor flare, we have very strict research definitions of what's minor, but minor really is for you. If this is something that is the usual kind of flare, there's a little bit of stiffness, a little bit more of this, it came and went, and you just want to talk through, is my medication working well enough? Is it persisting long enough? Those are the kinds of things that we can talk about. I don't necessarily have to see you, especially if the flare has resolved. I do need to know, however, how frequently you're having that flare. What about mild side effects? There may be a little queasiness in the stomach that you want to talk through, but it's getting better. Those are the kinds of things that we can manage. If, however, somebody is vomiting or they're suddenly feeling really sick with a medication, we may need blood work to determine whether that side effect is severe or not. Other things that we can do are things like our questionnaires. I talked about Arthritis Power, but the Rapid3 is an example of a questionnaire that you do at home, and then you send me the results. Sometimes the provider will have it embedded in their electronic health record so that you're able to complete it and they can see it in the portal in real time. Other times they have you email it into the office or get it to us in some way, but it gives me information about your function so that we can collect that data and then do something with it. Other things that we would prefer to do in person, obviously lab work, as you see there, but new patients, and there is a 50-50 split on this. There's some of us who really prefer to see new patients in person. I don't know you yet. I don't know exactly when you say this hurts, exactly what that means, when this is swollen, exactly what that means. I've had patients who say they're not short of breath, but I can see them huffing and puffing, but it's been such a long time that they don't perceive it as being shortness of breath. But that's something that I can really assess when you're in the office with me. Others like to do quick triage for new patients so that they can assess how urgent or acute the problem is, set up for blood work, and then have you come in for a more prolonged visit. So you'll have to see, depending on what the issue is, what's best for that particular new visit. And then annual visits where everything is perfectly stable and we're going along, those sort of yearly check-ins, those are also best done in person so that we can make sure everything is done correctly. And then obviously if there is progression in symptoms, so that you're getting much worse. This is not a minor flare that came and disappeared. This came and stayed and progressed and got worse. I need to see you in person. And if this is a brand new symptom, you've never had this before, we don't really know what that could be. So that needs to be seen in person. And that applies to whether it's a new pain, a new swelling, something that's changed, or a new lump that's appeared. We need to feel that to determine what that is. And then for those I mentioned earlier with high-risk disease, and there are multiple systemic diseases in which multiple organs can be affected. Rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, can have involvement in other areas, but there are other diseases that really sort of will involve 3 or 4 organs at a time, and that has to be assessed. And then obviously, if I have to inject a joint, I have to stick a needle in somewhere, I have to do an infusion, there's a medication that you're receiving for treatment, that needs to be done in the office as well. So some things we can do by electronically, by a televisit, others we really need to do in person. So how do you know that you're going to be safe? What keeps you safe and what sort of gives you the comfort in knowing that you can come into my office, into your provider's office, and not worry that coming to the doctor is going to make you sick? So the first thing is that we've really worked very hard to make sure that we all have personal protective equipment, which means that everybody's wearing a mask. Vaccinated or not, you're in a closed space, internal environment, and there are patients who have different levels of immunity, different levels of the strength of their immune response, and our goal is to keep everybody safe. I want to keep my staff safe, I want to keep my patients safe, and I want all of your families and friends to be safe when you go home to them. So we use masks, gloves, face shields were needed, gowns were needed when there is sort of high volatile. This is not as big a deal in outpatient rheumatology, but in hospital settings, you'll see more face shields and gowns. Nurses, all the staff and the healthcare providers are using the appropriate personal protective equipment. And we also ask that our patients and any visitor coming in with that patient wears a mask. It also applies to delivery people. If somebody's even bringing in a cup of coffee, I want you to have a mask because your entry can put everybody in that space at risk. And so these are some of the protocols that we follow. And the other thing that may not be as obvious to you is the extensive cleaning that now occurs, much more so, such that, yes, we all wash our hands. We hand sanitize. I probably do it before and after every single patient so that there's lots of hand washing and then rigorous cleaning of all high touch surfaces. So we always think about the exam table, right? So that's always cleaned, new paper put down, but now there's disinfectant that's applied that we know is virucidal and can kill very small viruses. The armrest, the handrails, the doorknobs, the little hook that you put your jacket on, anything in which there are multiple people touching that object, that gets cleaned. The scale sometimes, right? Depending on the kind, pens, if you're using pens to sign things on paper, those are also sanitized between each patient use. We actually sanitize every single room between each patient, between each person, so that it's fully disinfected. You may also see air purifiers now visible in many places. And what you won't see are all of the multi-touch, like the magazines and the toys that we used to keep in our waiting rooms. Much of that is gone because that then gives me paper that is going to be repeatedly touched by more than one person that I may not get to in time to sanitize. So extensive sanitizing procedures in place to keep patients safe. And then you'll see social distancing. And this is done in a variety of ways. Of course, when you're in the office, you'll see the chairs spaced apart so that they're 6 feet apart. Sometimes there's a marking on the floor. This is also for the space between the chairs, but also the space between the patient and whoever's at the front desk, so that we're keeping both of those groups safe. But other things that you might see now that we didn't do before is online check-ins. You might get a text message that says, let us know when you have arrived so that we can bring you up, so that you're not sitting in a crowded waiting room, but you come and you can go right into an exam room so that you're in a safe space. And that really helps me keep you safe, but it also helps the anxiety of the patient, who doesn't have to worry that they're going to come in, there's going to be 20 people in this tiny space and they're not sure how everybody is safe. So these are some of the things that we can do to minimize the number of patients and the time spent in the waiting room. Now, here's where the difference comes in. In parts of the country and the world, patients can sit in their cars in a parking lot. I'm in New York City. Nobody's sitting in a car in a parking lot. They may be sitting in the large foyer in the building, or waiting at some other location. So where you wait depends on where in the world you are, but just know that to avoid that collision in the office, you may be asked to wait someplace else and then come into the office so that you can go straight to the appropriate space. The other thing that is restricted now are the walk-ins. You used to be able to walk in to get blood work done, walk in for various things. Now everything is scheduled again, because you want to make sure, as I say, that there are no collisions in the hallways, so that patients can be safe. And then visitor restrictions. It used to be quite common for a patient to come, especially a new patient that may be worried about, I'm not going to understand everything, I'm not going to remember everything, to bring 1, 2, sometimes 3 friends or family members with you. Well, it becomes difficult to, number one, accommodate all of those people in the waiting room, but even more so in the exam room, where those are much tighter spaces. So there are visitor restrictions, which may vary. And so it's helpful if you or a loved one, you're concerned about, write it down, get it to the office so that we can manage those questions and answer those things as we go through. With our infusion suites, there's pre-screening prior to the appointment so that we are sure that, number one, you weren't exposed to COVID, 24 hours before you came. You didn't just have a fever, and so you might be ill. And it's not just to keep you out, but it's also to make sure that, we're paying attention to your health and advising you appropriately. And just like we have in the exam rooms, those suites are sanitized. Infusion chairs are placed 6 feet apart, and nurses, nurses are really hands-on, right? They're putting in IVs, they're mixing your drug, but when they're not physically in contact with you, then they try and keep a little bit of a distance, 6 feet away, so that, again, there is a safe space around you. And then, again, as with the exam rooms, we can stagger the appointments so that you don't have a crowded infusion suite, so that patients can also feel safe in that room, because you're going to be sitting there from anywhere from 30 minutes to 4 hours. And so it's important that you have a safe space to do that. We also now screen and test for coronavirus symptoms, and in many cases for the virus itself. So it's not uncommon to, when you call to confirm your appointment, or when the appointment is made, that you go through a screening protocol to say, have you had a fever? Have you been in a group of people who are outside of your usual, anybody there exposed? And really, this is how, a lot of household exposures occur. It's one person who's unaware, and then everybody else is exposed. So there's a lot of screening that we do as staff, and that we also do with our patients. You'll see for procedures, especially if you're going for something that is invasive, whether it's a colonoscopy or some other kind of procedure of that sort, you'll be required to have a COVID test before that, within 3 days of that test, especially if there's a potential for aerosolized particles, so you're doing a lot of deep breathing. Anytime there's a potential for contact, there may be a COVID test that's required ahead of time. And then you'll see thermometers being used, either the standalone ones or the handheld ones, to really walk you through to make sure that you're not coming in with a fever, unaware, in fact, that you have a fever. So you see the questions here really about the symptoms and signs of COVID-19, but also recent travel and whether or not you've left your state. There are still some restrictions. Hopefully, as we have more people becoming vaccinated, then that becomes less of an issue. But at the end of all of this, it's really important that there's a communication between the patient and the healthcare provider so that we don't neglect care. And one of the concerns we've had is because of the fear and the consternation about being safe in the office, some patients have delayed therapy and they come in, they're much sicker than they needed to be. And we really prefer if our patients aren't suffering. And so if you need to be seen every 3 months, let's try and keep that to every 3 months and use telemedicine to help us do that so that the regular checkups are done. And talking to your doctor, also talking to the staff. It's amazing how much, the staff is working very closely, can say, well, that sounds like you should really come in, or we can follow up with the lab results and the X-ray or the MRI results on the phone. And so we can save you the burden of the journey to come on in and really be able to get through and still deliver care. So again, it's communication and understanding that you don't have to neglect your care or neglect your health because we're afraid of being infected with the pandemic. It is a grave concern, but there are ways that we can manage this. So how do you know? We've been kind of alluding to this. What's going to be right for me? Is it a telehealth visit or an in-person visit? And can I make that decision by myself? So this is, again, that issue of the risk and benefits of a telehealth versus an in-person visit, because with an in-person visit, you have to travel, you have to get to the doctor's office. And for many of my patients in New York City, that means a subway train. For others, it's trains and buses or cars, or somebody has to drive you because you can't drive yourself. So whether or not that journey and the ability to do that and access transportation safely really then weighs into how frequently you can get to the doctor's office. But I'll have to say that there are parts of the country in which that was difficult in the first place because the rheumatologist was 2 to 3 hours away. So having telehealth allows us to see those patients who are farthest away from us, who could not get to us more so than every 6 months or so. Now they can come in electronically on my virtual screen much more frequently. So we're able to use this tool to help improve care for those who actually had very limited access. But if the journey to the doctor's office is difficult, that's one of the things that we need to take into consideration when you make the decision how often to come in and for what to come in for. So remember, your symptoms are your symptoms. You're the best person to describe them. We need to understand the severity of that condition, and especially if this is something that we know that can escalate very quickly. There are patients who know the moment they start to feel this, that they're going to become really ill. We listen to that, and that's the kind of thing you have to be attuned to and understand that you can come in. You also want to know what's happening in the world around me. Am I in a building that is being quarantined because there are so many cases of COVID? Am I in a city or a state in which there is a rapid rise in the COVID infection rate? Those are the cases in which we would say, let's try and do this as a televisit to spare you the risk of becoming infected as you're traveling because of what's happening in your location. And then we have to decide if testing or procedures are important and necessary for that visit at that time, then we have to find a way to do that safely so that you can come in for whatever care needs to be delivered. So lots of things that we think through when we do this. And if you have a health issue and you're considering whether to come in to be evaluated, a few key things are important. Have you had this before? Is this new? And when I say new, it's yes, if you've had painful joints, but have you had pain of this severity? Is it interrupting your sleep? Do you have to stop what you're doing because you can't go any further? Those are the kinds of things that we need to evaluate in person. That's severity. If you know that, for instance, this is something that's internal, your heart is acting up, you can't breathe. There are difficulties of that sort. We need to know about that, and that is something which requires a healthcare provider to physically examine you, live, face to face, not face across a virtual screen. In some cases, we have to send patients to the emergency room because they're having an urgent, emergent medical problem that may or may not be related to their underlying chronic disease. And then, we take into account the emotional health of our patients. So there are situations in which really this is just overwhelming, or there is an exacerbation of an underlying case of depression or anxiety that has to be dealt with. And so all of these things come into play when you make that decision with your healthcare provider about coming in or doing this electronically. So there's lots of things that we can access, but I think as I wrap up this portion, it is critical to understand the information that you bring to the room. I call this the virtual room, that I can then add to, so that together we can figure out what's happening, and we can come up with a treatment plan, and then decide if the next visit, sometimes we can do that and say the next visit is best done as an in-person visit because I want to follow up on what we did and I really want to put my hands on you, or we can follow this up with a televisit. And with all of that, come prepared. Shilpa will talk to you about all of the things that are being done with the e-room, so that when you come into this virtual room, you're prepared with your questions and the information that we need to actually deliver care. So I hope that's been helpful in sort of walking you through televisits, telemedicine, the values, the ups and downs of virtual care, and the ways in which we can use this to maintain our health and wellness and not be afraid to neglect or push off our care, so that despite this pandemic, we can continue to move towards a state of health and wellness. So I'm going to turn this back over at this point, and we'll open up for some further discussions and questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. That was really informative and reassuring as well to hear all the different procedures that are in place to keep patients safe across different clinics. So before moving on, and we have a few questions that I certainly want to go through, but before moving on, I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about eRoom, and you mentioned this as well. This is a resource that we've developed at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. We're always trying to support the community by developing resources, and so this is an online tool to help people with rheumatic conditions understand how to use telehealth and have better virtual visits with their healthcare provider. So on eroom.org, which you can visit if you haven't as yet, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your health conditions and get a free personalized guide to navigating telehealth. eRoom has recently been updated with information about how to decide whether an in-person or telehealth visit is right for you, something I think we've all sort of navigated and juggled throughout this pandemic. And so it has information about how to talk as well to your doctor about your condition, as well as things related to COVID, so the COVID-19 vaccine, etc. So we encourage you to take a look at eroom.org if you haven't already done so. With that, I'll come to a long list of questions. So let's see how many we can get through. Let's see, I'm going to try and clump these questions and ask you some of them in clusters, but I want to start actually with the first one around privacy. So, a lot of patients have asked us, when they go into their doctor's offices physically, who's around you, who's in the exam room, but not so on a telehealth visit. So how do we go about making sure, or how does the patient go about making sure that their doctor is in a space where there's, privacy is being followed, and that there's no one else perhaps that can hear them? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Privacy is critical because it's only in a private and safe space that we share vulnerable information. So there's 3 layers of privacy, and I'll start off with the patient end. So there are times when, I've heard so many different versions of this. The person's in a car with 4 other people. I'm not going to share information because I don't want to violate your privacy as the physician. And there are things that will not be discussed because it's in a crowd. So it's always important to make sure that as a patient entering the space, that the space is treated with the same care that we would treat an exam room with a closed door, right? That should be private. So that's the first thing. Where are you located? And for me, the physician, it's the same thing, right? So I make sure that I'm in a portion of a space in which it is quiet, there's nobody else around, and so there's no possibility of having that information, leaking out. Now, when we're doing telemedicine, we're doing it from multiple places. Sometimes it's from a clinic, sometimes it's from an office, sometimes it's from our homes, because many of us also were affected and could not go into our usual space. But it's just one of the things that we do to make sure that wherever we are, that space is private. And then the third thing is a system that's being used. And we all know about HIPAA and patient privacy. And one of the critical things is to make sure that there's nobody in doing an electronic listening to what you're saying or doing or transmitting. And so there are a variety of now apps in which there are privacy guardrails that are put into place. And so this is not the same as, for instance, just doing some kind of video chat on our cell phone with whatever recent app there is, right? So it's really important to make sure that the way that you're communicating, that method is also private. And so all of the telehealth apps have that embedded in there, whether it's through the electronic record. And you can talk to your provider about this to see exactly what they're using and whether or not that's HIPAA compliant. A lot of these rules were relaxed initially in the pandemic because we didn't have the platforms. And so it was just a matter of, how do I get in touch with this person to even tell them that their infusion has been moved or whatever it is we need to talk about. And so a lot of those rules were relaxed, but now all of these platforms have come into compliance so that the method with which you have the communication is also private. So it's both ends. I think of this as the old telephone game, right? It's both ends plus the line that goes between us. Privacy has to be present across the entire spectrum.
Great, that's very reassuring to hear. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it's a combination of the platform that's being used. It's sort of a continuation of certain legal procedures or binding protocols in place to respect patient privacy. That's being continued on in telemedicine and telehealth as well. Wonderful.
Exactly.
We have another question, also sort of procedural, related to procedure, if I may. So, when you go into the doctor's office, you're first, of course, visited by a nurse who sort of examines you, does your vitals, takes your blood pressure, what have you. This, of course, does not happen very often in a telehealth visit, but can it and should it, and how does it affect the overall assessment by the physician? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So depending on how the televisit is being done, sometimes you actually can interface, so that there are some of the EHRs in which you can have multiple people on that call. And so you can meet with the nurse first and then meet with the physician and then come back and do the scheduling. And that's a much more complicated platform. The problem with that is that you have to have a certain level of internet access to be able to do that. So that doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work in all parts of the country. But the other ways to get past this is, in many cases, when you have a telehealth visit, if you do your medication check, you're doing what the nurse really would have gone through with you. And much of what the nurse did, the doctor now has to do. So for me, telehealth visits actually are harder because I have a smaller team. The team now shrinks, and I'm doing much more of that personally. But it really keeps me in touch and keeps me sort of hands-on with patients. The other thing that's then done is a follow-up. You may get a follow-up phone call to do the scheduling, to work through whatever else has to be done, whether it's prior authorizations, whether it's scheduling tests, things of that sort. So there is a few more moving pieces, but it still gets done by the team. It just may not be done that you're walking from room 1 to room 2 to room 3. You're walking from space 1 on internet land to space 2 on internet land to space 3. So there are different ways that it's done. But again, every office, every section, depending on what the technology is able to do that a little differently. But again, that's something that you can talk with your healthcare team about. What's the most efficient way for them to do this?
Wonderful, thank you again. And continuing on along the thread of visits, and this is more situational, I suppose, and you touched upon it briefly. But say, we have two questions linked, if you may. One is about sort of very specific. So if someone is having a flare, so disease is flaring or their symptoms are worsening, for example, how does one decide whether it's better to go for a in-person visit or a telehealth visit? And I know you touched upon it briefly, but could you talk a little more about that, please?
Sure, and sometimes it's a very hard thing to determine. And there are times when we'll do a quick phone call when the patient calls to schedule that telehealth visit, because I say if you have a question about what kind of visit, speak with somebody. It's much better to do that. And then based on how we can receive that information and triage that, we can say, you know what, this is better for you to come in, or yes, we can do this as a telehealth visit. I'll often get little notes from my staff that says, so-and-so is having this problem. Is it okay for her to do this telehealth? Does he have to come in? And we can make that decision at that point. I'd much rather do that than have somebody on a phone who should be in the office. Now, obviously, if it's a large swollen joint that's very painful, or a small joint, those can be quite painful as well, in which that typically that requires an injection or some kind of aspiration, then that has to be an in-person visit, because regardless of what we do on the telephone or the whatever the internet platform that we're using, we're going to end up having you come in to the office. So I say, let's try and get that. Now, there are sometimes things that we can do to, sort of mitigate some of the discomfort. And so I'm not saying that you don't do a visit until you can have it in person. Sometimes we can assess it, set up all of the appropriate testing, and then very quickly create a slot to have that person come in because we've done the triage, so to speak. So I guess for me, the most important point here is communication. When we make these decisions in silos, sort of in separate spaces, not taking into account all of the different things that could be in play, and sometimes we end up putting the wrong kind of visit. But in general, if it's new, it's severe, it's something that I need to touch you, then you come on into the office.
Wonderful.
I hope that was clear. Yeah.
That was perfect, actually. And I think and correct me if I'm hearing you wrong, but what you're saying is communication is the key. And sort of this is an extension of shared decision making, where you talk with if you're in doubt, talk with your doctor and figure out what works best for whatever reason you need to see your doctor for. So thank you for that. And actually, connected to that is a really interesting question that's come to us about examination of joints. So you did mention, you might have a swollen joint, a large joint, a small joint. How does one go about doing a joint examination on telehealth? The question really, asks, isn't it important and helpful for your doctor to actually touch your joints and feel them? So how would that work on telehealth?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we thought it was impossible to assess joints, but then we had to figure out a way. So we've come to a bit of a compromise. Now, there's some things that you can't see. For instance, you can tell me that your hip's hurting you, but you can't tell me that your hip joint is swollen. It is physically not visible to you, right? You'll tell me if the bursa on the side looks a little full, but you can't tell me if the joint is swollen. And the same thing with the shoulder. It's very hard to be able to identify a swollen shoulder joint so that the reason my shoulder hurts is because it's swollen, just because of where the fluid accumulates. So there's some joints that are sort of, less easy for the person to see on themselves. But when you're looking at peripheral joints, so whether it's the hands, the wrists, the elbows, the knees, the ankles and feet, there are tricks of the trade that we've been teaching patients to be able to assess their joints. So for instance, when you make a closed fist, I can see whether or not there are recesses. So there are ways that we can look at a clenched hand to look at the joints to see, and I'll have my patients hold up their hands. We can have them hold their hands out straight, put them up fully extended so that we can see whether or not they're extended, turn, look at the wrist. There are various maneuvers that we can do. And then I always encourage patients to use a phone, because I can take that phone and you can point it at your knee, and I can have you do very similar things with your knees if it's difficult for you to get up. So yes, it is critically important. There's some things we can assess about joints with the examinations that we do. I can walk you through a shoulder exam, but that's all what we call active movement. You're moving the joint. There's additional information with passive movement where I'm moving the joint. So it's important for us to have both. And that again is a decision. If I have a patient who, and we just had this happen actually, somebody complaining of a severely painful joint and thought it was because of issue 1. They come in and I go, it's actually issue 5. Something that did not even come to that person's mind, but again, because of the examination. So something that's out of the ordinary, absolutely, we need to evaluate that. And, we do that within the constraints of what's safe for that patient. If it's unsafe or it is impossible for that person to get to the office, sometimes I have that person go to an urgent care site where I can talk to another provider and say, check this out for me, I'm concerned about this, so that we can at least have another hand on that patient to determine that. Now, again, we're not sending everybody to urgent care because I don't want you going into places where people are potentially sick, but if it's something that's really severe and you can't make it to the office, there are other ways in which we can have healthcare providers lay hands on you to do that evaluation.
Great, thank you. So it really is a combination and sort of trying to figure out with your doctor by your side what works best for what situation. I know we're coming to the top of the hour, so we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Unfortunately, we can't keep you here forever, though we have several more, so I'll just ask 2 more. Could you talk a little bit about, you talked about joints. Can you talk about skin symptoms, for example, psoriasis, plaques, and lesions? How does one address that during a telehealth visit?
Yeah, so again, this is where having a phone with a camera becomes very helpful, because it's not possible to often show your doctor all of the places in which you have a psoriasis plaque, for instance, especially if they're doing a total body count, right? So I can show my elbow, I can take pictures of the areas that I can have get to. I can have somebody take a picture of my back if I have somebody who can take a picture of my back. But there's certain sensitive areas in which we don't want to be taking pictures. And so, if we have eruptions in areas in which we need to have them evaluated, then that becomes something you have to come in for. But if I can take a picture, then that helps. Now, the other thing to remember is sometimes dermatologists have to do a biopsy on that rash because they're not quite sure what it is or it's changed. So if you have a rash that's new, or it's changed, and so the borders are funny, the color is funny, it's behaving differently, that is a kind of thing where we don't want to look at it and make the wrong assessment. We often need to get a piece of tissue. So dermatology really sort of, they have their own guidelines about, what should come in. But if we're monitoring and following something that is our usual, it's a patch that we've had that we know what this is, and it's improving with therapy, those are the kinds of things that you can take a picture and have that sent in.
Wonderful, thank you. And last question really is about, there's, of course, the need for a good internet connection when you're doing video calls, etc. So what would you say about the value of doing telehealth visits only by phone for those who are unable to access the internet or might not have a good broadband connection? Any words of advice from you on that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So it's about the conversation, right? It's about me connecting with you, hearing you, and then giving you advice. Now, do I need to see you to make many of my assessments? Absolutely, yes. But there are times when I don't need to see you, I need to talk to you. And I know that in the office we're all in mask, and my patients love it when I call because they're like, I can see your face, I can see your smile. I can't see that in the office. I know you're smiling because your eyes are smiling, but nothing beats having that conversation. So even if you can't see that provider because whatever, you just can only have a phone call. I've had cases where we're on a video call and the video drops and I have to immediately convert to a phone call. The conversation is what matters. And so having that conversation, getting those complaints kind of worked through and getting the guidance as to how to proceed, what next to do, that is essential. So even if you can't see the person, you can hear them, they can hear you, still critical to have that, that virtual visit.
Wonderful. And what a wonderful note to end on, because this, you talked about the value of the conversation, and this indeed has been a very valuable conversation. So thank you very much for this wonderfully informative webinar. I know a lot of you in the audience might want to revisit all the information that Dr. Wright has provided us. And so please note that this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the Creaky Joints website at www.creakyjoints.org. Dr. Wright, thank you so much. We also want to thank AbbVie. This webinar was made possible with their support. But most especially, we want to thank our audience for joining us and for their very valuable questions. There were several questions we weren't able to get to because of time constraints. And again, our sincere apologies. Please know we maintain a list of your questions and they will help us to inform future content so we can continue to address the concerns of our community. One last thing that I wanted to share is that we know that the coronavirus pandemic has been especially stressful for people living with chronic diseases. The Global Healthy Living Foundation has developed a free program for patients and their families to access updated information, community support, and other resources, including latest information on vaccines, what the evidence is telling us about masking, how to manage your chronic disease, and so on and so forth. So if you have not already done so, we do request and encourage you to visit this Creaky Joints and to join this program. With that, I want to thank everyone very much. Dr. Wright, thank you for your time, for all that valuable information. Our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. Stay tuned for more webinars like this. We conduct them regularly, so please be on the alert for them. And again, this webinar is recorded and can be accessed on our website. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.